The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Oh my God, are you joking?
Not a line, I never won a penny in my life.
I don't know what to say.
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, it shocks me.
This is amazing.
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQ's live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's newsroom. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do.
His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you.
That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frothy in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
For dartball practice.
Britain's newsroom on GB News, weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people. To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial.
With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers.
I agree.
And that's precisely what I'll get.
Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
Good evening, fellow travellers. Welcome to the Neil Oliver Show on GB News TV, online and on your radio sets. This week, I'll be taking a look at the Scottish COVID-19 inquiry and asking what is actually being revealed there. I'll also be talking to a lady whose brother died during the pandemic and who has given evidence as part of the inquiry. On Monday, a final High Court judgment takes place regarding Julian Assange's appeal. Will he be extradited to the US? All of that, plus plenty of discussion and opinion from my panellist, journalist and presenter, Jasmine Birtles. But first of all, an update on the news headlines.
Very good evening to you. It's just after 6 o'clock. I'm Sam Francis. The latest from the newsroom this hour, and we will start with developments from Iran, where a helicopter carrying the Iranian president and his foreign minister has crashed. That was as it was crossing a mountainous region in the north of the country this afternoon. The aircraft suffered what's been described as a hard landing while returning from a visit to Azerbaijan. It's also being reported the lives of both the president and the foreign minister are at risk. And local reports in the last few minutes suggest that rescue teams have now reached the area of that crash site, but that poor weather conditions are complicating their search. Here in the UK, the Chancellor has vowed to compensate victims of the infected blood scandal with a £10 billion package. The families of those affected have been holding a vigil this evening in London ahead of an independent inquiry's final report out tomorrow. Jeremy Hunt is claiming the funding is part of fulfilling a promise he made to a constituent who died after contracting hepatitis C. The scandal has been the subject of the biggest ever public inquiry in the UK after tens of thousands of people were infected with contaminated blood. NHS staff will be told to work evenings and weekends under new plans that Labour says will slash waiting lists. Hospitals would be asked to share staff and to pool their waiting lists as part of a £1.1 billion drive to provide an extra 40,000 appointments each week. Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting has also promised to protect whistleblowers and to cut the NHS's reliance on migrant workers.
£1.1 billion paid for by clamping down on tax avoidance and also closing non-dom loopholes as well. And that will enable us to put £1.1 billion directly into the pockets of NHS staff to deliver those extra appointments at evenings and weekends using an approach that's been tried and tested at the London hospital I can literally see out of my office window in Westminster. And therefore an approach we need to see available to patients right across the country, not just in London. And that does come with a cost, and that's why we've made this commitment as our first step on the journey to busting the Tory backlog and cutting NHS waiting lists.
Officials in Slovakia are investigating whether an attacker who shot the country's Prime Minister acted alone. 59-year-old Robert Fico's condition is no longer life-threatening but is still very serious. That's after he was hit multiple times on Wednesday. A man has now been charged with attempting to murder him, with officials there suggesting the attack was politically motivated. A 14-year-old boy has died after getting into difficulty in the River Tyne in Northumberland. A huge search involving police, paramedics, fire crew and mountain rescue teams was launched on Saturday. Another boy, who's 13, was rescued, but he's currently in hospital critically ill. The body of a 14-year-old was later found in the water. America's first black astronaut has become the oldest person in space, 60 years after he was almost picked for an early NASA mission. At 90 years old, former Air Force pilot Ed Dwight experienced a few minutes of weightlessness with 5 other passengers on board a capsule operated by Amazon billionaire Jeff Bezos. The brief flight from West Texas was Blue Origin's 7th time taking tourists into space. And finally, if you haven't heard already from the sporting world, Manchester City are Premier League champions for a record 4th time in a row tonight. They beat West Ham 3-1 with Phil Foden scoring twice. Arsenal were in with a chance of winning the title on the last day of the season if City had slipped up. But the Gunners' 2-1 win over Everton was in vain. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts. You can scan the QR code on your screen or go to our website gbnews.com/alerts.
Not seeing the wood for the trees is a sort of selective blindness we all understand because we all suffer from it at times. Here in these islands, we are surrounded by trees of a sort anyway, but that too often go unseen especially and shamefully by those that claim to lead. Unremarked are the trees I'm talking about. Ignored are the trees I'm talking about, disregarded as though they were of no value. Worst of all, overlooked as though they weren't even there. But the trees I'm talking about are there all right. The trees I'm talking about are the people, real people. Every day, some of those people, those real people, stop me to talk. For a few minutes, we talk together about some of what we think is wrong with Britain and the wider world. The people I talk to know what's wrong all around them without having to be told. It's called common sense, often in tones of the utmost frustration and disbelief at what they see all around them. They're people with families, people with jobs, people with a sense of responsibility, who know what's what, who know what's right. Most of those folk are the sort that keep the world moving forward. They're the sort that make things, fix things, deliver things, that do the things everyone counts on every day. They happen to be the sort of people I've always lived among, my fellow travellers, people who understand me and I understand in return instinctively without having to think about it. When I was working in South Africa a lot of years ago now, good people there were in the habit of describing anyone straightforward, sensible and useful as an oak. I don't know if they still do that, but at the time it struck me as meaningful. It also made me think about how back here in the old country of Britain, we've learned to say that nearly all the oak trees are gone, which is true, that our ancestors cut them down to build houses, to build the ships of Nelson's navy, all of that. It's true that all of that shipbuilding and house building changed the landscape of Britain, that the old oak trees are thin on the ground. But still, the oak tree is synonymous with Britain and with what it means to be British. Hearts of oak, we say, of the best of our kind. The oak tree is slow-grown, long-lived, 1,000-year lifespan for each one. Strong, resilient, a protector of all that lives in its shadow. Long ago, people learned to admire the oak. Druids paid them special attention, to say the least. Druid is an old word that means something like the people that know the oak trees. Long ago, our ancestors cut down most of the oak trees, that much is true. But also true is that oak trees are all around us yet, in another form. The oak trees I'm talking about are those people I mentioned before, that do things, build and make things, fix things, that do the things we count on every day. They're also the people that get on about their business without asking for any help. They don't need help, and they don't want interference. They certainly don't want or willingly tolerate interference from people in authority who know nothing about nothing. What breaks my heart is that the powers that be completely disregard, ignore and dismiss those people, those oaks. If the powers that be see those people at all, then they count them as less than nothing, surplus to requirements. Indeed, if they notice them now, it's to disparage them, call them names, Little Englanders, fascists, white supremacists, nationalists, white van man. This disregarding of an entire class of people, people who just want to work to build better lives for themselves and their families, is a disgrace. In America, Hillary Clinton dismissed them as a basket of deplorables, by which she meant anyone who didn't agree with her. Justin Trudeau of Canada described people that wouldn't take the so-called vaccines as racists and misogynists. He called the truckers far right, seized their bank accounts. Peaceful protesters were jailed. Farmers standing in the face of attempts to take their land, to end generations of food production, and others like them all across Europe are vilified as far-right extremists. Protests against lockdown by the sort of real people I'm talking about were ignored, ridiculed, violence was meted out upon them. That this happened disgusts me. More and more the policies being pursued in the West are revealed as simply anti-human. What do most people want after all? A home of their own, a family, a job, peace to get on with it. Also peace in the world. Most people in the world want peace. Instead, what do they get? They get needled incessantly about things that are no business of the authorities. Those authorities come after people's cars, the way people can heat their homes. People are needled about the food they eat. At school, their children are taught that mum and dad might not be the people to listen to about much of anything, and certainly not about such matters as whether they should be content with the bodies they were born in, the names they were given. The anti-human agenda tells people who just want to be left alone to work and raise families unmolested, that they are to blame for the imminent ending of life on earth. The anti-human agenda tells hard-working people to pay no attention to decay in the homeland, to failing infrastructure, breathtaking price rises on food and fuel and every other damned thing, to systemic corruption in the institutions, in the banks, to failing standards of education. Ignore all that, those people are told, and watch us send billions of pounds to corrupt nations thousands of miles away for pointless, endless wars. Ignore that you don't feel safe at home. Ignore the potholes on the roads. Ignore all that, those people are told. And if anyone raises their voice to object, they have their noses rubbed in the fact there's not a damn thing they can do about it. What breaks my heart is that those people, descendants of hundreds of generations of others like them, deeply rooted in the soil of this place, are overlooked as though they don't matter, as though they never mattered, as though they have nothing to give, as though this country and the world would be better off without them. Or even ridiculed for that sense of belonging, that sense of place. The anti-humanists want to take an axe to all of that, to cut everyone everywhere away from their roots, so that they feel disconnected, belonging nowhere, and therefore anywhere, rootless as tumbleweed. It's one of the oldest tricks in the book, this cutting of the roots of people. Every religion, every ideology, every leader of a popular movement has employed it, and it works every time. This behaviour by the latest ideologues and authoritarians is as deliberate as it is cynical. They wield the axe to separate us one from another, to cleave us into smaller and smaller groups, so that all the little groups might be set at each other's throats, whether it's on the grounds of race or religion, anything to stoke the fires. All the heat, all the anger is between groups when it should simply be all of us against the few of them. We don't even have to like each other while we deal with them. My enemy's enemy is my friend, remember, and all of us have a common foe. The solution for everyone begins with seeing that it's happening, all this division, all this driving of hatred and fear, and it's being done on purpose by the only ones who ever profit and benefit from the resultant chaos, which is the few. Where is the leader who will notice, far less care, what might be built of such a forest of oaks? There are towering oaks all around us, and any leader could receive no greater honour in this life than to have the respect of those people. Those people are still here, long after most of the oak trees felled long ago, and someone with the wit could stand within, alongside those oaks, and make something unbeatable. It's an open goal we have before us. Parliament's rotten. The institutions are rotten. The judiciary, the civil service, the media, rotten. The fiat currencies are Ponzi schemes, rotten. All of it, the whole damned system, the whole damned state is rotten. Anyone with a mind to could knock it all down. It's an open goal, and anyone with half a mind could enlist those people that make and fix and do, empower them and have them dig out all the decay and set about the straightforward, easier work of building something new, something fresh and something clean. Here's the thing, these anti-human authorities are powerless in the face of the many, but only when the many realise and accept that they're being played yet again by the few, provoked into fighting each other when all that anger might usefully be pointed not from side to side at the neighbours, but upwards to where all the evil lies, where all the trouble in the world comes from. In spite of all I've just been talking about, in spite of all the fear porn, all the censorship, the deliberate and cynical conjuring into being of one war after another, one scamdemic after another, one existential crisis after another, in spite of all that, frankly, I honestly think because of all that, the many are finally believing less and less of what they're told. In fact, the Oaks believe none of it. That will be our strength. That is how we will prevail, together, in the face of the axe being wielded against us. I'm joined tonight by presenter Jasmine Birtles. Hello, Jasmine.
Hello there.
Always good to have you here.
Thank you.
To share the hours.
Yeah.
As I said, it breaks my heart that the people, the good people, are just ignored.
Totally.
Where is the leader that will recognise the people for what they are and what they're capable of?
Well, any leader that's doing that is now being branded a far-right extremist, dangerous, someone like Geert Wilders, someone like Robert Fico in Slovakia, who has just been shot, as we know. And it is truly shocking that our media, a few media, certainly in the UK, have basically said, well, you know, he asked for it. He's too right-wing. He was against the Ukraine war. He was against lockdowns, things like that. You know, and so that is essentially what they're saying. And
he spoke about the WHO and the changes to the international health regulations and so on, and pointed out what ought to be glaringly obvious to everyone by now, that that's a power grab by unelected, unaccountable centralists.
Yes, where have we heard that before? Extraordinary, isn't it? It seems to keep happening all over the place. And, you know, as you were talking about the oaks, the trees around us, I was also thinking how ironic it is that those, I wouldn't say environmentalists, I would say political environmentalists, those who've greenwashed themselves and are pretending that what they're doing is for our good, you know, the ecological good, they hate trees. I mean, any time you have these sort of political environmentalists, you know, they get power, they cut down all the trees. You know, they did it in Plymouth. You remember that? And also, they seem to hate flora and fauna generally. I mean, now in this country, incredibly, if you happen to have chickens in your back garden, which is something, if I had a back garden, I'd have them, you have to register them. And now, I just put something on my Twitter about New Zealand. The New Zealand government is forcing, they're burning bee boxes. What?
Hives.
What hives? Exactly, they're burning hives because they say, oh, they've got mites. That is not a reason to burn them. I don't get it, but there really seems to be an assault from the so-called ecologically friendly leaders that we have across the world.
You're right. That Agenda 2030, or whatever you want to call it, which sells itself as caring for a sustainable future, the planet, and all life upon it, seems quite the opposite, quite the contrary, to care about nothing and to care about people least of all.
Yes, and I mean, hence the hatred of farmers. You know, again, one of my Twitter followers said that in India, the farmers there are being absolutely hammered. We've seen what's been happening in Europe. Geert Wilders, as far as I can see, has come into power on the back of the anger of the Dutch farmers. Farmers in this country are on their knees pretty much, but they're getting together now. And there is this extraordinary hatred of farming, of cows. Cows have been vilified. Cows, for goodness sake. And it's a weird thing that wherever you have these political ecologists, political environmentalists, they get rid of trees, they'll get rid of fields and put metal and glass, you know, you'll have this sort of solar panels, but they seem to hate places where you've got, you know, the usual sort of bucolic scene that we've grown up with nice sheep and cows.
And which is why it seems absolutely obvious to me that were there to be a leader who would... These people are waiting.
Yeah.
The people that understand all of this, that appreciate the landscape, that know how to care for it, that know how to build and make and fix. They just need one person, to let them go, in a sense.
Yes.
Not even to lead, just to stand within them and let them get on with what it is that they do.
True. I think these people exist, but the level of courage that it takes to be that person and to stand against all the establishments, against academia, particularly against media, against the civil service, all of which are railed against and backed, of course, by the WHO and the WEF and the UN, all that sort of thing. They are railed against any sort of individualism, any sort of support of the people that you've been talking about, those hearts of oak.
And it's just the people. It's just the people need to be let loose. We're on a break, after which I will be taking a look at the Scottish COVID-19 inquiry, asking what its findings have been so far. You're watching the Neil Oliver Show on GB News. Please don't go away.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country. That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Dubes & Co. Weekdays from 6 p.m.
Organisations, plural, because there's loads of people doing this. The organisations are charging schools to be part of this odd league table about who's trying to outdo who when it comes to who is more trans-inclusive with the kids than the next person. There's something that makes me uneasy about this.
Supposing a child comes home and says, you think, oh, I've done well today. He said, well, how have you done? He said, well, I was #1 painter, or I was #1 reader. No, I wasn't. I was made LGBT champion. This is a 4- and 5-year-old. Look, I can understand this, actually, as we develop into the secondary school. I can understand more debates taking place. I cannot understand why we have to thrust it at young children. And I think if you ask the parents, they'd be hostile to it. And what about the role the teacher has to play in all this?
Society has been one way, the pendulum is swinging the other way, and they're pushing it very far in order to kind of proliferate change. And this is probably the toughest period in that evolutionary process, because the LGBTQ+ community is saying that you've got to really rage against the machine to get people to listen. Because put it like this now, even this conversation, the whole country is listening, the whole world is listening. These are the kinds of eyeballs and ears they haven't had before. And there's going to be friction. There's going to be a locking of heads in the process to getting to a point where you establish a new equilibrium where they feel more incorporated. Like I've said, the greatest force of allies that the LGBTQ plus community has always had is heterosexual women. What you're moving towards now is doing things that is beginning to turn them from allies into people who feel that, oh, for you to thrive, I'm being deprived, and that's a problem. When they realise you're alienating allies, they will understand you've got to recalibrate to have that kind of understanding between both parties.
In the GB newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, GB News brings you accurate reporting of the day's topical agenda.
When the news breaks, wherever and whenever it's happening,
we'll be there.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. Now, the UK COVID-19 inquiry is currently sitting in Edinburgh, the Scottish part of that inquiry, as it probes the devolved administration's response to the pandemic. Joining me to discuss this is consultant pathologist Dr. Claire Craig. Welcome, Claire.
Thank you, Neil.
Have you been keeping up with the testimony, let's say, that's been being given to both of these inquiries?
I have been watching it, and it has been really quite shocking. And it really stands in contrast to the English inquiry, because these are real people telling their own stories in a way that we haven't seen in England.
What has been the nature of the inquiry in England? What's been the style and the content then?
So in England, what we've predominantly seen is people who are already in positions of power going and defending their decision-making. Whereas what we're seeing in Scotland are people whose lives are affected getting to finally be heard.
I've seen some of it, and I'll be the first to admit, you know, I haven't been on top of it as much as I should have done as another observer. It's unbelievable testimony that people are coming forward with about. It's beyond neglect.
It really is, and it's really, really important, because what they're doing is lifting the lid on what happened in care homes in spring 2020, and that is such a fundamental part of the COVID story. So 46% of the deaths in Scotland that were attributed to COVID happened in care homes. So if that story isn't quite the one that we've been told, it's important that it gets heard.
Jasmine, it is quite astonishing, is it not, that these stories are being told, and by and large, the general population still are unaware.
It drives me nuts, because, as you say, this is really important. We've got people, real ordinary people who have suffered terrible things, actually getting the chance to say something. But the mainstream media is not covering it. And I think it's because, generally speaking, it can't bear to. The editors, the journalists can't bear to admit that they were wrong and that they were part of this, because it's not just the care homes, it's not just the medical establishment, it's the government, it is the media, it's the civil service. You know, again, this sort of big blob of individuals who all were speaking and thinking in lockstep, and now it's being thrown back in their faces and they don't like it.
Claire, what was happening? I mean, the people to whom this was happening, you would regard as amongst the most vulnerable in any of our communities. And what the treatment that seemed to be meted out to them is beyond neglect, to the point where it just seems cruel. What are we looking at here in terms of the testimony as described?
So I look at it broadly as falling into two camps. So on the one hand, we had people who were given do not resuscitate orders. And the reality is that most resuscitation is not successful, and when it is successful, you often need intensive care support. But that happened at the same time as hospitals were denying admission to anybody that had a do not resuscitate order. So it wasn't that it was do not resuscitate, it became do not give any medical care to these people. So that was one catastrophe. And then the other side of it was what was happening with end-of-life medication, whereby people who... we had the protocols that were binary in terms of what could happen if somebody deteriorated. And if they weren't going to be actively treated and put on ventilators, then they were to be given end-of-life medication. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody in a care home with COVID ended up on end-of-life medication. And there would have been some for whom that would have been appropriate because they were going to die. But it seems that there is a bigger middle portion here than I had appreciated at first, because there are so many people who've been telling stories about their loved ones who, under other circumstances, would have been treated very differently, and who, for lack of visitors, which was a big deal, did not have the support and care they normally would have had, and were being given these drugs, which are very powerful and dangerous, and which palliative care experts were calling out in May 2020, because these protocols were very explicit about how you accelerated the drug, but said nothing about winding it down. And these drugs suppress the respiratory drive. So where they have a great usage in end-of-life care when you've got cancer, it's a different story when you've got an acute respiratory infection, and the drive to breathe is incredibly important in terms of survival.
Yeah, so you got... Sorry,
I'm just thinking, so essentially you're saying that really quite large cohorts of people were being murdered. I mean, honestly, that's the way it sounds to me.
So I think that's really, really difficult term to be using.
Yeah, sorry.
And I don't think that the people who were giving out these medications had any ill intent. I genuinely don't think there was any ill intent in what they were doing. It was how these decisions were being made is the problem. So first of all, you've got people who, the doctors, were giving out these prescriptions beforehand, getting people already ready for lockdown, and then were very much practicing at a distance at the other end of a phone. And so people who were making the decisions about the likelihood of living or dying did not necessarily have the expertise to be doing that.
That really begins to touch on what frightens me about what happened. It was the fact that these places, a lot of these care homes became places in which the elderly were lost and isolated. The normal engagements with the family, who have the best interests of those people closest to their hearts, were left out of the equation. And that these people, often with dementia, often in a very precarious health position, were isolated in every way that mattered.
Absolutely. And when I first heard these stories, I will admit to being very sceptical about it, because as a doctor, what I've experienced is that when somebody dies, you often have sort of two types of relative. You have the ones that have been at the bedside and who've heard all of the details and have followed the story in depth, who understand what happened. And then you have the sort of relatives at a distance, however far that may have been, who very often don't quite get it and feel, aggrieved about the process and want to blame. And so when I first heard these stories, I thought that this was because of mass communication breakdown, because of what we had done. If you remove the relatives from a dying situation, you're going to create that problem. But having heard all these testimonies where the story's the same, again and again and again, it becomes, I just think I was wrong on that. I don't think it was a communication problem. I think there was more to it than that. There was more going on there.
And Jasmine, it felt like yet another example of why locking down in the way that was forced upon us, it's another example of the way in which that was disastrous.
Every way. Honestly, I cannot think of a really good reason to lock down anybody, any of us, whatever cohort. And particularly in this case, where we had so many stories, and even I've seen videos of people, at the window of the care homes trying to touch each other, and they can't, and physically held away from each other. How is that good in any way, anyway, for people who are trying to get better? It's like we now realise it's a good idea to bring dogs and cats, pets in to help people. The very least that you could do is to help people by having them very close to their loved ones. That's very often what makes them better. Forget about the drugs and everything.
Jasmine and Claire are going to stay with me. We're going into a break, but after that, we'll all still be together, and I'll be joined by one of the witnesses who testified during the Scottish COVID-19 inquiry, and she'll tell us what happened to her brother during the pandemic. You're watching the Neil Oliver Show on GB News. Don't go away.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say.
Hello, welcome to your GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Looking ahead, sunny spells on Monday, but it is going to be turning more unsettled as we go through the week. At the moment, we've got a ridge of high pressure extending out towards the west, bringing settled conditions for the rest of this evening and overnight. So looking ahead, we have got low cloud, mist and fog moving its way in from the North Sea. That will progress further inland with a bit of a breeze coming into East Anglia. Further towards the west, that's where we'll see the clearest skies, and Northern Ireland may see some mist and fog developing. Chilly underneath the clearest skies, but elsewhere holding up at around 10 or 11 degrees. So quite a murky start out there for many of us to start Monday morning. Best of the sunshine first thing is going to be across western parts, so even into western Scotland, but holding on to some sea fog and low cloud the further east you go. Like I said, some low cloud, mist and fog across Northern Ireland that will gradually lift and break, and then bright skies across the west, but low cloud lingering through the morning. But as we go through the rest of the morning, that low cloud should start to lift, break, melt its way back towards coastal areas, maybe taking a bit of time to do so, but elsewhere turning dry, plenty of sunshine on offer. We will still see a few showers breaking out, especially across parts of western Northern Ireland. Some of these could be heavy at times, and potentially even northern parts of Wales, but elsewhere feeling pleasant in the sunshine, where we do see it up to 20 or 22 degrees. As we go through Tuesday, again, some low cloud coming into eastern areas. Then it's a mixture of sunny spells, but some heavy showers breaking out, especially focused across the west as we go through the afternoon. And then into Wednesday, we've got a low pressure system out towards the east, could bring heavy spells of rain and generally rather unsettled.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
GB News is the home of free speech. We were created to champion it, and we deliver it day in, day out.
Free speech allows us all to explore and debate openly the issues most important to us, our families, and of course, the British people.
Having challenging conversations to enlighten each other.
Which is why we hear all sides of the argument.
We are the People's Channel.
We will always stand by the freedom to express yourself.
On TV, radio and online.
This is GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. My next guest lost her brother, James, a father of two, aged just 41, during the pandemic. The reason for his death was given as COVID-19. She has given evidence at the Scottish COVID-19 inquiry. Before I introduce her, just get this sense of the atmosphere of the testimony of the inquiry. Here's a short clip.
The inquiry must investigate whether the right to life under Article 2 was respected and protected. We anticipate the inquiry will hear that people were pressured to agree to do not resuscitate notices, that people were not resuscitated even though no such notice was in place, that residents may have been neglected and left to starve, that families are not sure they were told the truth about their relative's cause of death, that the usual process for certification of deaths was departed from, The inquiry must investigate potential violations of Article 3, the prohibition on torture, inhuman and degrading treatment.
Pamela Thomas joins me now down the line. Hello, Pamela. Thanks for joining me this evening.
Hi, Neil. Thanks for having me on.
Can you give us a sense of, well, what happened to your brother and the testimony that you gave to the inquiry?
Yeah, well, I don't know if you've watched the inquiry or not, the evidence that I gave, but everything that's kind of coming out at the inquiry has been quite damning, and there's not a single person reporting on our testimonies, the things that we've went through as a families, the way we've had to suffer, the way we've been stonewalled, the lies, the cover-ups have been non-stop since day one.
Tell me what you saw happening to your brother.
My brother was basically locked away from us. My brother was 6 days before I was allowed to have a WhatsApp video call with him. And by that time he was placed on a ventilator and he was unconscious, so wasn't able to communicate with me. I was only able to communicate with him, speak to him and see him via a phone screen. It was absolutely horrific. Every single day, the phone calls, I would phone first thing in the morning, the doctors would do their rounds, they would phone me back. In the afternoon, I would phone again, do a video call roughly around about tea time, between tea time and 7:30, and then a call again before I went to my bed each night. So it was roughly 4 times a day, and every single time I was basically being told the same thing. Every single time on the phone calls I was being asked if I had been vaccinated, if anyone else had been vaccinated in my family. If we hadn't been, then we should be. And all along I was told that my brother had a single organ failure. It was his COVID lungs. It was only his lungs that was a problem with my brother, which was basically lies.
What did James go into hospital with? What were his symptoms that prompted him to seek treatment at all?
So it was dehydration and diarrhoea. So we were under the impression that he would have some fluids and, he would be home in no time. But a few hours after him being admitted into hospital, we were told that he was going to die. He was going to die within a matter of 2 hours. We were told that he was going to die. I can still remember to this day the screaming. How can he be going to die? How is he going to die?
What has been, Pamela, what has been the atmosphere in the inquiry? Have you felt that your testimony and the testimony of other people who have related stories to tell, in what way is your testimony being received there?
Well, it was fantastic to get the opportunity to give the evidence and say, although there was issues around being able to say my brother's name, for instance, that had to be all sorted out on the first day of the inquiry. We weren't even allowed to say the name of our loved ones. Eventually we were allowed to, but we weren't allowed to name the hospitals or any of the doctors or nurses or anybody that was involved in their care. We were restricted from doing that. But we got the chance to give our evidence, and obviously by being able to do that, that's what's got me here today. And obviously I've had other kind of podcasts and things like that.
We approached the NHS Trust for comment. They said, while we cannot comment on matters relating to individual patients due to patient confidentiality, our thoughts remain with Mr. Cameron's family. Our clinicians have responded in great detail on 2 occasions to the concerns raised by the family. We have already invited the family to raise any outstanding concerns with us, and this offer remains.
Pamela Thomas, thank you so much. My heart goes out to you on account of everything that you've gone through, the loss of your brother, what it must have been like for your family, but thank you so much for taking the time to bring that to light this evening.
OK, thanks for having me on. Take care.
Now we're going into a break, after which we'll be considering another plight, the plight of Julian Assange. Don't go anywhere.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
2,000 football banning orders have been issued to England fans ahead of this summer's Euro 2024 tournament in Germany. But authorities think that more than 300,000 England supporters could go to Germany, with Scotland fans, of course, also expected to travel in huge numbers. Well, I'm joined now by GB News' home and security editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the show. So you went to a press briefing this morning. As I understand, the authorities are gearing up to tackle what they see as a huge wave of potential hooliganism at the tournament. What's the latest?
Well, they're certainly not saying they're expecting hooliganism, and they are preparing for the worst, of course, if it happens, but hoping for the best. They say that in recent tournaments, England fans and, of course, Scotland fans have been pretty well behaved, but there will be very significant numbers attending that tournament, which gets underway in just over 5 weeks' time. That first match is Scotland taking on Germany in Munich, and of course just 2 days later it's England against Serbia near Dortmund. So 300,000 England fans alone they're expecting, because it's so accessible. I spoke earlier to Chief Constable Mark Roberts, who is the national lead for football policing. This is what he told me.
Positive, you know, England fans have got a great record at recent tournaments. We know when any number of that people travel, there's always potential for issues, but I think the German authorities are really well prepared. And I think one of the positives, particularly thinking about our fans, Germany's a beer drinking culture, so the police are well aware of dealing with people in the nighttime economy. They deal with plenty of big festivals, so I think we're going to a place that is well suited to work with us to keep everyone safe and make sure there's no issues.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
Our job is to do what's in the best interest of our country.
You made my argument for me.
My guest and I tackle the issues that really matter, with a sharp take on every story.
I'm hearing it up and down the country.
That was a beginning, not an end.
Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Neil Oliver Show. On Monday, there will be a final judgment in the High Court regarding the appeal by Australian-born publisher Julian Assange against extradition to the United States. With that in mind, he faces 18 criminal charges, and it's going to be a matter of what the court finally decides. Joining me to discuss this is Chairman of Republicans Overseas, Greg Swenson, and also Editor-in-Chief of WikiLeaks, Kristen Hrafnsson. Kristen, thanks for making time for us this evening. What do we predict is going to happen on Monday?
Well, if I were to predict a logical and rational and just outcome, it would be that Julian would be granted leave to appeal. He was granted provisional leave to appeal on one ground. All the other grounds, which were very impressive, were dismissed, and some of those were just dismissed on absolutely incredible twisted logic. We can come into that later. But he was granted this leave to appeal because it seemed that he would not be granted First Amendment protection as a publisher and a journalist in the United States. However, the United States government was asked to clarify that So they were asked a simple question, will Julian Assange be able to rely on the First Amendment in a US courtroom? The United States government has come back in written form and said he can seek to rely on the First Amendment. Now, that's a no answer in anybody's book. So they haven't fulfilled what the request that the court said. So the logical outcome would be that on Monday, and it shouldn't take long, the judges will say, you haven't met the points that we set, and he will get a leave to appeal. However, we've seen a lot of very strange and spurious things in the courts here. So I have to admit that I take a cynical approach to that.
What is Julian Assange's mood at the moment? I mean, it's almost an impossible question to answer, I know, but after all of this time, year after year after year, where is he now?
Well, he's been in Belmarsh prison now for more than 5 years. Mentally, you can imagine what an effect it has to be an innocent man locked up for more than 5 years in a limbo. Before that, he spent 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy as an asylee. Before that, he was under house arrest for 2 years. So it's 14 years of being deprived of liberty in one form or another. Of course, he's been under an extreme duress, and it's stressful. He has suffered. And I cannot go into personal detail. I visit him regularly, but it's a matter for the court, and the records have been sent to the courts, which say basically that he is in grave danger.
Greg, looking on at this, I can only give my opinion on this. It seems unbelievable to me that a publisher in the 21st century has been treated in this way and continues to be in extremis in the way that Julian Assange is.
Yeah, it's pretty outrageous, and I think I'm one of the converted on this. When it first happened, a decade ago, everybody just kind of jumped to the conclusion, and they threw him in the same basket as Bradley Manning, which I thought, in retrospect, was a mistake. So, Julian was a publisher, or is a publisher, and he published something. That's different than stealing. He didn't steal anything. Bradley Manning stole something. He went to the penitentiary, and for 7 years, as it turns out, because he was found guilty of Espionage Act, amongst many other things. So I think you have to really separate the two. And so, over the years, by paying more attention to the detail, that's one reason I've flipped on this. But the second reason is what's happened in the last 5 or so years in the US and the UK in terms of freedom of speech and freedom of the press. It's outrageous what's happened. And the list of examples, starting with the Hunter Biden laptop and the Russia collusion hoax, and whether it's media companies purposely censoring themselves for the benefit of one view that they have, or the government actually getting involved with the censorship. We saw that here with the 77th Brigade. We saw it constantly with the Biden White House working with Facebook, working with other media companies on the censorship, mostly during the COVID years. That's probably the most obvious. But that's really changed perceptions of, conservatives like myself who always kind of jump to the first conclusion of, anti-American, let's put him in jail. It's just a natural impulse when you see American or British soldiers at risk, which you can kind of attach to that. But that's not on Julian. I might not agree with. I would have preferred he didn't publish it, but that doesn't mean he should be in jail for publishing it.
Kristen, what are the ramifications for the role of publisher, for the role of people who seek to bring truthful, accurate information to the public? What does this fiasco do to the future of publishing in the West?
It is one of the most gravest threats to the future of journalism if this goes ahead. So, and every major human rights and free speech organizations in the world now agree with that, and they are pointing to the very severe implication this could have. The precedent being set, and it could be argued that it had already had a very serious cooling effect on the media, which has hurt the press freedom worldwide. And it just goes without saying. I mean, if the American government is allowed to have universal jurisdiction and as in this case, demand an extradition of an Australian publisher who is publishing in Europe and never comes close to the United States, and hand him over and throw him into jail there. Not a single journalist anywhere is safe in the world.
And to me, the most glaring part of this is that he's hardly alone in having published what he published.
Absolutely. I mean, he was publishing in coordination with one of the biggest powerhouses in the mainstream media environment, with the New York Times, the Spiegel, the Guardian, and actually under Obama, the Justice Department under Eric Holder did look into the matter whether they should open a prosecution against Julian, and they came to the conclusion that would be just too much a danger to the First Amendment principle. They actually called it the New York Times problem, because there was no distinction being made between what Julian did and what the New York Times, our collaborators, our media co-workers in the project were doing.
Greg, surely this is a situation from which the US administration must extract itself.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, for the American government, the U.S. government, to be involved in this kind of censorship or the threat to publishers, not just
the threat to a publisher's life.
It's it's really done great damage, and I think we've seen, and I agree with you, Kristen. We've seen the results of this, right? And now I can't pin this particular incident on the lack of interest from the media. Maybe that's just because they become biased or disagree with with the people in the mainstream. But this is not a good moment for it, and I'm glad that there's a good chance that he won't be extradited. So,
well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
That has to be all from me this week on TV, but this conversation will be continuing online. We'll be continuing to chat, so please go online to the Neil Oliver Show on gbnews.com. But in the meantime, I'll see you next week, TV viewers.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your GB News weather forecast from the Met Office. Looking ahead, sunny spells on Monday, but it is going to be turning more unsettled as we go through the week. At the moment, we've got a ridge of high pressure extending out towards the west, bringing settled conditions for the rest of this evening and overnight. So looking ahead, we have got low cloud, mist and fog moving its way in from the North Sea. That will progress further inland with a bit of a breeze coming into East Anglia. Further towards the west, that's where we'll see the clearest skies, and Northern Ireland may see some mist and fog developing. Chilly underneath the clearest skies, but elsewhere holding up at around 10 or 11 degrees. So quite a murky start out there for many of us to start Monday morning. Best of the sunshine first thing is going to be across western parts, so even into western Scotland, but holding on to some sea fog and low cloud the further east you go. Like I said, some low cloud, mist and fog across Northern Ireland. That will gradually lift and break, and then bright skies across the west, but low cloud lingering through the morning. But as we go through the rest of the morning, that low cloud should start to lift, break, melt its way back towards coastal areas, maybe taking a bit of time to do so, but elsewhere turning dry, plenty of sunshine on offer. We will still see a few showers breaking out, especially across parts of western Northern Ireland. Some of these could be heavy at times, and potentially even northern parts of Wales. But elsewhere, feeling pleasant in the sunshine, where we do see it up to 20 or 22 degrees.